All right, guys, we're back. So starting with hierarchy, again, when we talk about hierarchy, we talk about what's most important on the page versus what's least important. So think of a menu in a restaurant. What are the most important things that you want to see? Typically, you see the categories of food first, right? If you're at a fancy restaurant, they're going to bury the prices or not list them at all. So pricing might be very, very tiny at that fancy restaurant, or they're going to bury the price like at the very end of the description of the item. But typically, if we think of a menu at a restaurant, we see the categories, right? We see appetizers, which is usually a large header. We see the individual items of the food, right? And those typically have a header that is slightly smaller than that main appetizer's header. So, for example, if we're looking at creating hierarchy here, everything's the same. It's very hard to distinguish what's most important. Here, they've made this all caps and they've italicized this line. We can tell they're starting to be a first, second, and third situation going on here, but it's still not 100%. This one, they have centered some things. They have bolded and capitalized this, and then they bolded this, okay? Better, but could be a little better. And this one, if we look at over here, perfect, right? I see on the moon, a giant leap for all of mankind. So this is an article. Americans first to walk on dead lunar surface. And then I see the body copy, my paragraph text, right? So if you're not familiar, body copy, paragraph text is what you use for your main content. And then you have your header typically and a subheader, and then you might have a third header. So really think about how you establish, especially when we move in to the portion where you guys start building your landing page for your website, which we'll talk about next week. When you guys start moving into that portion, typography is going to play a huge role in that. Okay, and if you'll notice here, you guys, as far as fonts, this is all the same type family. We're just using the italic version and the bold version, but this serif here, these three sections, this is all the same type family. So, and then we've got this guy. So we are only using two typefaces. This one has different attributes. It has an italic, it has a bold, and we've made this just a little larger in size. But we are only using two typefaces, two fonts, okay? So the usually good rule is no more than two or three typefaces, especially for you guys doing logos. You know, two typefaces max, especially maybe if you have a tagline, right? But when you limit yourself to the two typefaces, it's automatically going to be more consistent. It's automatically going to be easier to read. And we'll talk about type families a little more, but type families can be really, really powerful too. So again, just showing you guys some more examples on hierarchy and contrast. So here we have this really large, bold sans serif, do your best. Anything worth doing is worth doing right. So our little quote there in italics in the serif font. And then it looks like we have the same serif font down here at the bottom, just smaller in all caps. So look here how we're really creating that hierarchy. We're creating hierarchy by making things bigger, but we're also creating hierarchy through the different combination of the fonts. Okay, you guys see how this obviously is the first thing that we see, and this is the second thing that we see, right? That is what hierarchy is designed to do. Your guys' job when you work with type is to lead the viewer and to tell them how and when they should look at whatever they're looking at. So this tells me that this should catch my attention immediately, and this is my secondary information. So especially when you're trying to catch someone's attention quickly, think of social media graphics where people are just scrolling and scrolling. And if you don't have that good hierarchy, you know, how are you going to grab somebody's attention if there's something that is moving so fast, right? So again, thinking of the anatomy of type, again, I'm not going full intro to typography on you guys, but I do want to point out this is a chart that talks about the anatomy of type. Sorry, I don't know why it's a little blurrier than I thought it was. Sorry, guys. But you can see the basics. So thinking about that X height that we talked about earlier, the cap height, which is going to tell you how large your capitals are. And then a couple other things you need to be conscious of, especially if you have lines of text, right? Sometimes you have to increase the leading to increase the spacing between the lines of text. Some things that will affect that are your ascenders, which are things like B, lowercase h. You have these little guys called ascenders. And then for lowercase letters, sometimes you have descenders. So descenders can be the little tail on the J, the tail on the P. You really need to be conscious of those because if you, for example, have a line of text that has this J, if your second line is too close, this tail might be running into the fonts or the line of text on the bottom. So really paying attention to the characteristics of the type will help you be better at typography. It will help you be better at layout. Okay, and layout is the big portion of design. And things like swashes, tails, anything that extends has potential to affect things like your kerning, your leading, and your tracking. So you need to make sure you're paying attention to those things. So type classification, again, thinking about, fonts, and fonts have characteristics and classifications based on how and when they were created. So if we think about, for example, classical typefaces, their characteristics, they have a low contrast between strokes, they're heavier. If we jump down to modern typefaces, usually a very strong contrast between thick and thin strokes. So if I'm saying something is modern, I may not necessarily be talking about the type classification, more of like modern contemporary as far as style or aesthetic goes. But you need to make sure that you're paying attention and understand that there are different spaces that these fonts live in, and that affects how they read on a page and how they're paired together. So again, Google font pairings. I will give you guys some resources later, but if you go to Pinterest and you look up best font pairings, you will get tons of charts like this. If you go to Google and you look at font pairings, these are actually Google fonts. So these are fonts that you can download through Google, and this is showing you how they pair. So Open Sans is a really popular one. Open Sans is really nice because it's a full type family. You have a regular, you have a bold, you have an italic, you have a semi-bold, and that's really going to give you that flexibility to create your hierarchy. All of these fonts here, if you like the way those pair together, all of these fonts here can be downloaded through Google Fonts. There's a couple more. Again, pairing Futura with the Superscripty font. Again, you wouldn't use the Superscripty font a ton of places in your document, but those create enough visual contrast that they would be easy on the eye when they're on the page together. Some of these are a little bit more intense. They're kind of showing you some more decorative typefaces. So even something like this ostrich, you would probably want to use fairly sparingly. And you wouldn't want that to get too small because these little lines are going to get hard to read if you scale that down too small. I'm just trying to give you guys some examples and some options to get you more comfortable with pairing type. So 7 ways to add contrast in font pairing. So a handy little chart. So if you're pairing fonts, you're still not super comfortable, look for those huge differences, right? Pairing things that are very bold versus very thin. Maybe regular and oblique. Oblique or italic very sparingly. Monospaced and condensed, straight versus curved. We saw this combination earlier. You guys saw how that paired really nicely with each other. Something that plays with the baseline, right? This bounce lettering that's really popular these days, it breaks that baseline because it's not all on one straight line. It would pair well with something that's grounded in a baseline. Joint versus disjointed, and small versus caps. So again, showing you guys some more font pairings, and these are the names of the fonts. So if you like any of these, a lot of these fonts are free. You can download them. Think about appropriateness again. Something like this says 50th anniversary celebration for Georgia and Logan. This is very formal and elegant, but it's not super, super stuffy, right? Now, 50th anniversary, that's a big deal. Chances are these folks might be a little older since they've been together that long. So it's something that is age appropriate, but fits the tone of that, hey, this is a really big deal. This is a celebration. So thinking about comparing font combinations and logos, I'm not going to linger too much on bad font combinations, and this one is not awful, but definitely I'm going to show you guys how they simplified this down. So if we're looking here, we can tell they're using all the same font. This they've capitalized the share, this they've left lower caps. It's pretty tight as far as kerning. All the letters are really condensed and really close together. But look what's happening with this tagline. When you take this, and this is the thing about condensed fonts. So condensed fonts are those taller, skinny, kind of squished looking fonts. Okay, they look really nice when they're large, but look what happens when we scale that down. Look how tiny that is. Even on the screen, that is becoming very hard to read. Because it is so condensed and tall. When you shrink it down, it's only going to get more compacted on each other. And it's going to make that look pretty tiny and pretty hard to read. Like there's no contrast here whatsoever. I mean, yes, there's contrast because this is black and this is red. But as far as legibility and being able to have that quick distinction, it's not really there. And then we look over here with the redesign, and they actually did a ton of things, right? They changed the colors, they changed the graphics, they took the tagline out. But one thing they did here is it's still, except for the F and the S, it's all lowercase, right? So they made everything lowercase, so it reads as one word. They made the word food green and gave emphasis on the food rather than the share to really showcase the attributes of that program. And they picked a font that is a little bit, so here you see this one's super tall, really vertical. This one is a little bit more even as far as spacing and verticality and horizontal, right? So it's not too vertical, it's not too horizontal, it's a good mix of both, and it makes it a little easier to read. Hopefully you guys can see that this versus this is a lot easier to read and just simply communicates quicker. And when you're thinking about, especially with logos, you want to make sure that you get your fonts and your logos and your word marks. You want to make sure that you get that instant, right? That we see it, we know what it is, it communicates, and it's clear. So thinking about good font combinations within a logo, here we've combined the symbol. We have Albana Residential. This great, beautiful script font pairs really nicely with this illustration. And then the word residential has, again, that super clean, very geometric sans serif that really, we know that this is the name of the thing itself. This got a nice styling to it, and this tells us the purpose of what it is, right? So very clear, very easy to read. We could easily scale this up or down, and we wouldn't have a problem reading it. Looking down at the bottom here, Ivy Joan, again, there's one of those on the type classifications chart we looked at. This is definitely in the realm of a modern typeface because it's bolder, it's got those big thicks and thins of the letters, and then we're pairing that again with a thinner, simple, clean sans serif. So this still has the right tone to it. It's kind of high-end, probably. Ivy Joan Home Provisions, probably a little bit more on the expensive side as far as the service goes, but it really hits the right tone. This one I chose to show you guys because this is lowercase serif font, but they are really playing with the elements of these letters by interlocking these G's. Do you see how beautiful that is? Super simple, but really thinking about, greater giving, right? Thinking about what greater giving is and interlocking those as if, they're helping, they're bonded, they're assisting each other. So really playing out the concept of what greater giving is. And then Greater Giving Sri Lanka, again, simple sub-typeface that really focuses on what this is. So these all three really have great hierarchy as far as what's most important. They have that very, primary, secondary relationship, so that's why I chose to show you guys these. A couple more websites. If you look at web resources, there's FontPair. If you click this guy, this is a whole website dedicated to pairing fonts. So maybe when you're working on your logos, if typography is just not working out for you, or if you're having issues, this shows you, featured font pairings. It tells you what the fonts are, and you can even download the fonts directly from here. Holy crap, super easy, right? It's all in one place. Maybe you want a serif sans serif. Maybe you're looking for that relationship. It will tell you up here, you can sort based on what you want. So again, look at this, very beautiful when this is combined together. Make a great header, make a great body copy. Really pay attention to font combinations. So I think one of the coolest things here is the ability to download that font pair. Let's go back to here. So again, ultimate collection of Google font pairings. So this is showing you, again, fonts from Google Fonts. And it also allows you to copy the code if you want to embed this on your website, or you can download the font pairings to use them on your computer. And download the PDF. No, thank you. So again, if you're, you don't have to make it up as you go along. There are resources. People have compiled nice font pairings for you. You just have to know what you're looking for and to know what the tone of your intentions are for the type. This one. So again, Google Web Fonts showing you some libraries. Here we go. Showing you some more pairings. And it's telling you what the fonts are. So this in particular, you guys, is showing you, so when you start building, you start talking about the landing page for your website next week, this is showing you what these fonts look like on web pages. So this is one of the reasons I picked this resource for you guys. We're almost done, you guys. Thanks for hanging in there with me. So again, moving on, we're almost done. I got a few little blurbs I want to say about type on the web. Web design is 95% typography. Remember that. Point size, minimum font size as far as web, because when we're on the web, we're talking about points. That's how we measure things. 10 to 12, 10, or we're in pixels, I'm sorry. But point size to pixel size, that's something you need to think about. So for example, 10 to 12 point font is 15 to 25 pixels. Again, some fonts may naturally appear larger than others. Therefore, you may be able to go a little smaller. So this is showing you on the screen. All these fonts are 14 point, but because of their X height and because of their makeup shape-wise, Myriad looks a little small, Arial gets a little better, but Verdana at 14 point actually looks larger based on those characteristics. So this is a great example of X height and how types are made up shape-wise, because again, they're all the same size, but they visually look larger. Contrast, so when you're thinking about on a screen, dark gray type is easier on the eyes. Screens have a strong backlight, and the black-white contrast created by pure black text can be tiring. So think about which one of these looks better here, right? These get a little washed out, so not enough contrast versus things that are fairly easy to read. So web fonts, just to give you guys a little bit of context on how fonts actually work on the web. If you're actually building a website, if you're using Squarespace or WordPress or whatever, you can use fonts through Typekit, Adobe Typekit, or Google Fonts, because these websites will give you the code and then you actually put that code into your site to have these fonts show up. If you're using, again, a CMS, the font libraries will contain web fonts. What if I want to embed a specific Google font? It allows you to generate the code and put it in your website. So that's not something that you guys will be doing in this class, but I want you to understand how web fonts work. So if you're creating a website and you're using a font that's on your computer, unless that font is embedded somewhere in your website's code, for example, if I'm looking at your portfolio site that you've created and I don't have that font on my computer, the internet is going to sub it for something similar. So for design consistency and to control your website, you really need to make sure that you're using web fonts because, for example, if I'm using Roboto on my website, the moment I log on to that website and the moment I click, www.google.com, if Google is using the Roboto font, I will automatically see Roboto because somewhere in that site, whoops, somewhere in that site, they have embedded the code. And so what it's doing is it's not having to search for a font that's not there because it has this web link to the font. You will always see that web font. Okay, so we're going to stop there, you guys, but I just wanted to give you a little overview on thinking about, what I like to call type appropriateness, what fonts go well with what. Obviously, if you're doing an invitation for a kid's birthday, you wouldn't use something like this, right? It's a little too formal for maybe a 4-year-old. But if you're doing like a wedding or a retirement reception, this font right here might be appropriate because it's a little bit more formal. It's not super stuffy, but we can tell it's got that classic, more formal look to it. So we're going to stop there. And I encourage you guys to use those font resources. Look up those websites. Maybe find your own. But don't say, I don't know how to paratype because there's plenty of charts that can show you how. There's lots of resources. Fake it till you make it, right? You will eventually become a good typographer if you experiment enough. And that's the goal. Experiment. Okay? All right. Well, I'll see you guys later.